Welcome to the Managing Violence podcast, helping to make communities safer by providing education in how to prevent, prepare, respond, and recover from violence in all its forms. Your host is an expert in violence and aggression management. Here is Joe Saunders.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of the Managing Violence podcast. Thank you for all those that express concern as my home country is currently on fire. It is pretty devastating down here. I am thankfully mostly unaffected. There's fire all around us here in Melbourne, throughout the state of Victoria, New South Wales, in Queensland, South Australia. There are fires all over the country, Tasmania, WA as well. It is pretty horrific. We've lost a lot of wildlife, people's homes, a few lives have been lost, including firefighters. I do encourage you, please, if you are in a position to do so, please donate to the relevant charities. There are a lot going around that are trying to raise money for victims, for wildlife, and for recovery of the towns that are affected. But on a personal note, other than a little bit of smoke and some irritation in that regard, we are completely unfazed and very, very lucky compared to many. So thank you for your concern. And as a small gesture from the Managing Violence podcast, any donation that is received through Patreon up until the time the fire crisis is over will be donated to fire charities. So if you've considered supporting us on Patreon, jump on. Every single cent that comes through Patreon will go to fire recovery efforts until the fire crisis is over. So we appreciate your support for the podcast and for the country. And of course, if you do wish to donate, you can head over to patreon.com/managingviolence, patreon.com/managingviolence. Moving on, today we have an episode with the return of our most downloaded guest, Mr. Tony Blauer. And Tony will be on speaking about his passion for self-defense and for personal safety. And more to the point, we're going to be getting into scenario replication training or role-play training and how to do that properly and how to do that safely. So Tony was one of the first to really popularize this type of training in self-defense. And it's a fascinating conversation. I hope you enjoy it. Here's Tony Blauer. Hey, Tony, thanks for joining us on the show again. It's great to have you back. Your first episode was the highest rated episode we've ever had. So I was itching to get you back for a second go around, and I appreciate you making the time.
Yeah, no, man, I'm flattered and honored. I was excited. And when you let me know, I was like, wow. I mean, I never think of it in terms of like analytics and stuff like that, but that was very flattering. So very grateful.
You're a figure that is so well known in this community, in the violence management, violence prevention community, that I think people are always anxious to sort of hear from the source. I mean, we've talked a lot offline. I mean, you're a polarizing figure, but that comes with the territory of being probably the most recognizable name in the industry. So it's good from a podcast host point of view, because a lot of people tune in to hear what Tony's got to say. So I appreciate it.
Right. Are they going to bring up this time, or yeah? No, I get it. I think. Listen,
we'll do that episode at a time when it's not Christmas.
Right. No, but I was telling you before, when we were just logging on and talking, like 59, and I've been doing this for 43 years, and I still wake up. About a week or so ago, I woke up about 5 a.m. and rewrote the entire lesson plan for our SPEAR program for 2020. I mean, just saw it in my mind and grabbed the app that I used to take notes and just wrote it out in it was just, and the reason I'm bringing that up is I am as passionate about the art and science of self-defense today as I was when I got the bug in the 70s.
Yeah, that's actually interesting. It's not what we plan to talk about, but I think it's hell. Why not just call it on the fly? Do you think how has it evolved for you? Like, I mean, your initial passion, I guess, was determining what the reality was behind the difference between what you're doing as a martial artist and the reality of violence. Has that sort of a passion evolved and morphed over the years?
No, it's interesting because, you know, and this is actually new. I wrote a post a few weeks ago, and another pretty well-known podcaster, Marcus Aurelius Anderson, um, made a comment, and in the story that I was sharing was, this time that I was playing baseball, and I don't know if I talked about it in our first show, but I got jumped by two guys from high school that were a couple of years older than me. And when you're 12 years old and kids are like, I think they were probably around 15, that's a big size difference. And they jumped me as I was leaving the elementary school, and beat me up. And I got home and I wasn't hurt. I was more scared. And I said to my dad, I just got jumped. And, he looked at me because I didn't have any marks on me. And he said, he made some joke, probably like, did they hit you with pillows or something? And I said, no, this is serious. They said, hey, welcome to high school. And I was scared, like, is this going to happen in high school? And he basically said to me, you got to learn to defend yourself. We got to find your martial arts school. And about 6 months later, a Taekwondo school opened up about a mile or two from where I lived. But what was interesting, it had never occurred to me, and I was explaining this story in an Instagram post, and this guy, Marcus, commented, he said, I'm grateful that those two guys jumped you because, that day helped change, the trajectory of self-defense, something like that. And he had studied my stuff from, what's that?
One of those butterfly effect moments.
Yeah. And it was interesting because I was a highly competitive skier, and I made the joke right away online. I answered, I said, if I hadn't been jumped, maybe I'd be like selling skis in Switzerland right now. But like, who knows? Like, that the moment I started doing martial arts, there was something so centering for me. And I knew, like, this was it. It was, what they call, like, in the talent code, ignition. There was a moment I went in there, started doing stuff, and I was like, I want to do this the rest of my life. And then the story that I've been telling people for years on podcasts is, when my mom asked me, what are you going to be when you're older? And I was 15. I said, I'm going to be, she said, what are you going to study in school? Or are you going to go into the family business? And, I know I shared this in our first call, but I said, hey, Mom, I'm going to be a famous martial artist like Bruce Lee. I'm going to have my own martial arts, self-defense program. And she pat me on the head and say, okay, dear, we'll talk about this when you're older. And, so I've been telling that story for years. I had never told the 12-year-old story. And now I'm like going, oh my God, like that was really the moment. Like that was really that butterfly effect moment that had that not happened, I would have never signed up for, Taekwondo. And the story I was telling from when I was 15 would never have happened. So truly a butterfly effect story.
Yeah, it's very cool. I think we all, with a little bit of introspection, we find those moments in our lives that, they seemed unpleasant or negative in some way, but they shape where we go next, and that can lead to great things if you're the right person for the right job. So,
well, I think everyone has that. It obviously becomes something you look back at more and study or analyze if you end up doing something that gets you noticed in life, and if you look at anybody's job, whether it's a doctor, a nurse, a cop, a firefighter, a secret agent, a football player, I mean, everybody has a moment where they go, I remember watching this athlete, and when he, won the title and he was holding the trophy over his head, and I went, oh my God, and that's when I got, like everyone's got that, everyone has that story if they look for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And how did that evolve obviously you got to a point where you built a system that was, for lack of a better term, it was fit for purpose. It was a leading system in the world. And for self-defense and for be able to transmit serious skills and concepts in a short period of time. How did that? What kept you going to keep pushing and to keep evolving the system and to keep improving upon it?
I think, probably, some people laugh, some people won't. Uh, you know, my there was no OCD back then, but I was like, I just wanted everything to be right. And I remember, one story that I did share was when it was very much like, when Bruce Lee had that Wong Jack Man fight and he beat him easily, but noticed he was out of breath. So he immediately started studying, aerobic conditioning, right? It was like, I was like that. If I did something and I missed the bag a certain way and I got frustrated, I'd go, well, why did that happen? If I hyperextended my elbow, I was like, okay, how do I make that never happen again? Pain is the mother of invention. If a student came in and said this happened and I felt this and I did that, I would always use any type of feedback as impetus or some sort of stimulus to like go deeper, and it wasn't that I thought that there was a system that was going to cover everything and answer everything, but it's really just part of my personality. uh, if you ask somebody who knows me, does Tony overthink? When they'd stop laughing, they go like, what do you mean? Like, because I'm always like, okay, should we do this? Should we do this? Let's try this drill. Let's do. I'm just obsessed, literally obsessed with getting it right. At the same time, remember, I'm also, that brain also created the off balance principle, where one day it occurred to me that we are off balance all the time, physically, emotionally, psychologically, during real violence. Nobody's in a good stance. Nobody's in a perfect position. And so I created this idea that we need to practice being off balance on purpose, because if we practice off balance on purpose in training and we are off balance in the real world, there'll be synchronicity there. And something in our brain will go, okay, we've done this before, we can get through this. Where if you practiced always in a perfect stance, always with perfect conditions, and then the imperfect conditions present themselves in the real world, whether it could be ring, cage, street, violent encounter, you get much more emotional, psychological distraction. And as I've pointed out many times, that's really where the fighters won or lost. It's not on game day, it's not like, oh, I should have done more push-ups or I should have done more bag work. On game day, you look at anybody trained or untrained, and what you actually see is a malfunction of the emotional psychological system.
Yeah, and actually, that whole idea of fighting from an off-balance position, I think back to Chuck Liddell, and one of the things that made Chuck so dangerous was his ability to generate power from positions where it didn't look like he was loaded up for a power shot. And his ability to knock someone out while moving backwards or at an unconventional angle made him incredibly dangerous, and no one really wanted to pursue him in the cage, because you can never really be sure when you're in safety.
Right. And that was Chuck as a intuitive street fighter who also grew up sparring much older, stronger men. So he developed like a tenacity. And if you know his background, it was atypical. And you could see the difference in, most of the people that he fought were on balance, and he had that ability to move at, like you said, these like unorthodox angles. And that'll always, I always used to make this joke, when you spar with your wife or your girlfriend, how they would hit you with any shot, because the syncopation of their movement was so bizarre that your nervous system couldn't time when to slip or block. They would come in, if I remember sparring, she's now my wife, but my girlfriend gloves, and she'd be giggling, and she would just like drill me in the fucking face with shots. because they didn't come from a boxing stance. They came from some weird hand position, and she'd start to move, and it would be like, I don't know if you remember Elaine dancing on the Seinfeld episodes.
Yes.
You ever saw that episode? But it'd be like that. Oh, when's this gonna? Oh shit! I just got hit. So it's a funny thing, but it's it's all part of that is understanding and appreciating the neuroscience of movement.
Yeah. It's interesting actually, just to parallel sport a little bit. Travis Stevens is a Olympic medalist in judo, who's also a black belt in Brazilian jiu-jitsu and has competed a little bit in Brazilian jiu-jitsu. He said that if he's fighting a Brazilian jiu-jitsu player, he'll nearly always pull guard rather than going for the takedown, even though he's one of the best takedown artists in the world, because the Brazilian jiu-jitsu players, their movement is not what he's trained to deal with. They're so amateurish in their ability to react to judo attacks that all his feints and his setups don't work because they don't react the way a trained fighter should when he's throwing a feint of a particular throw. And therefore they end up in an awkward position or the timing's off. And he says it's just too much work. He'd rather pull guard and just fight Brazilian jiu-jitsu because trying to get these high-level jiu-jitsu guys to fall for his judo throws is just not working for him. And I thought it's really fascinating. I've had the same experience as a predominantly a judo guy competing in Brazilian jiu-jitsu. My old faithful combinations just didn't work because they didn't respond to the first attack the way I expected them to. Like you say, that unorthodox movement can work to your advantage if you train it, or even if you don't realize you're training it, you just develop it. But let's move on to the actual topic of the day. So,
let's do it.
Okay, cool. So, what I sort of flagged with you early on after we had our first conversation was more of a deep dive into scenario training, and I guess probably the history of how you grew to embrace scenario replication, and then I guess moving on from there, how we end up making that safe and productive, because we know it can go pear-shaped. But let's start at the beginning. So I remember in the first show you told the story of hitting boards at different angles, or a shove in the back followed by turning around and hitting the board. So how did that evolve into real scenario replication for you?
Yeah, I mean, I was fascinated by I just wanted to know if it would work in a real confrontation, and I obsessed about it. And so, just to recap for anybody who didn't hear that, but I'm breaking boards, and then suddenly I've got the thought that goes in my head. Well, of course, a huge Bruce Lee fan, boards don't hit back. I'm thinking, well, this is great. I've got one of my students holding the boards for me. The boards they're dead wood. It's not like I'm punching a tree. It's not moving. It's right there. I can see the grain. I said, okay, that's a good punch. I went through 2 boards, 3 boards, 4 boards, whatever it was. But I was like, so big deal. How can I make this more realistic? And then what I did was I turned around and had my student shove me or grab my shoulder and then immediately get back in position. So I would turn and then start throwing the punch as I was turning, as I picked up the threat in the corner of my eye, just turned it into a scenario. And just that idea made sense to me. And I started, doing things like that. That wasn't very practical. I think I broke my hand on one of those attempts, and but I was always looking at everything, I was asked the question, why are we doing this? Why are we practicing this? And, of course, that's very popular now with Simon Sinek, what's your why? But I don't know if people remember, you might remember this, but, in 1986 or 88, one of those years I came out with an article in Inside Karate magazine, and the title was A Word to the Wise, but wise was spelled W-H-Y-S.
Yeah.
And so and the reason I bring that up is because like Sinek's message of why, know your why, is so deep and so profound and so elegant and eloquent in the way he explains it. And it's true. Everyone needs to know their why. Why are you practicing? Why are you doing something? Because when you find that, you'll find your flow. And for me, that was always super, super clear. My purpose, my focus was always on, could I protect myself? This obsession with understanding it from a self-defense perspective. So I might get fascinated with a skill set. And I'll give you an example, like 1993, I'm in Coronado, working with the Naval Special Warfare with an element down there. And we're doing a bunch of drills, and I'm showing them these close quarter drills where, we're using long guns and weapon systems and multiple assailant. And one of the guys in the class says, "This is a cool move, but will it work with our body armor on? Will it work when we're in full kit?" And I said, "Well, how far is your body armor?" And we had, just to be clear, is we were wearing equipment doing the drills, but we didn't have any of their ceramic plates in, which made the vests much more ballistic protection. And so these ceramic plates weren't in there. And when you put them in, how you can bend dramatically changes. And how I tie this together for you, Joe, is I said, "I wonder if this will work with our plates." And I said, "Well, how far are the plates?" They said, "Well, it would take us 5 minutes to get them. They're in another room locked up there." I said, "Well, let's go get them." We put the plates in, and sure enough, they restricted some of the movement enough in the torso that the move that I had created for them didn't work anymore. And I didn't go, "Well, are these regulation and maybe it's only good for tall?" And there was no bullshit. I went, "Oops, okay, well, fuck, I'm glad we evaluated that here, guys. Let's stop practicing that move." Like in the flow of what we were doing, everyone was digging it. And then one guy said, "Will this work with the plates?" We tested it, didn't work. We stopped doing it. So the reason I bring that up is it's really also a good metaphor for personal accountability, professional accountability, where we do these things, we practice these things. And if you're the guide, the mentor, the leader, the coach, the trainer, and you're suggesting that this is practical, but you're not evaluating it safely and scientifically, then people might leave there overconfident. And you're trained, had we never had that discussion, that them learning that pattern and that program and that movement might have compromised a mission or somebody's safety or somebody's life. And that's how serious I always took this stuff. So anything that I practice, I would pressure test, and I would really try to understand, really try to evaluate. Could I look in front of a class, regardless of gender, experience, or background, and say, "Here's a really good drill to practice. We think it's going to enhance your safety."
Yeah, I think you'd be able to incorporate gear and realistic conditions, I think, is so important. And it's something that was missing at least from the civilian side, for so long. We drilled martial arts uniforms in nice, pristine dojos with hardwood floors or mats or whatever it was. And if anyone did any self-defense at all, it was usually against a martial arts style attack. It wasn't against an untrained attack. But one of the things that I found most interesting, and digging back through the history of, I guess, your history as it pertains to self-defense, was you one of the first people to really dive deep into the behavioral, emotional, and psychological aspects of self-defense or violence, and not only have an understanding of that, but then incorporate that into drills. So are you able to expand upon how that process unfolded for you?
Yeah, I mean, I in the 80s, you remember the original story, my student losing his fight in school, he's 15, and the whole bully thing there. And in that moment, people have to listen to the first episode to hear the whole story, but in that moment when he lost and he told me the story, I felt like I had let him down. I didn't blame him. I didn't say, "Well, you shouldn't compromise your hands. You're standing too close," or, "Hey, sometimes you win and sometimes you lose, and get back up on the horse, man," or whatever maximum I wanted to throw at him. I knew in that moment that there was something wrong with the way I had prepared him. But I also knew that how I prepared him was how everyone prepares, because I was passing on everything that I had absorbed being a voracious reader, studying, training with whoever I could. And I wasn't at that point there. It's funny. It was about 13 years before the first UFC. But what we were doing is I had a wrestling background. I loved boxing, and I'd done Taekwondo, and of course I was a Bruce Lee junkie. So I was teaching him mixed martial art, even though there was no name for that, right? And there were lots of guys doing that. I mean, that was the origins of Kempo from Hawaii and stuff like that. They were blending all sorts of stuff, and I'm sure there was convergent elements all over the world, but we were just calling it different things. But my whole thing was, and it was interesting because in talking to other people in the early 80s, when I would say, hey, this happened to my student, most of them blame the student. If I talk to another well-known instructor in Montreal, I go, hey, this happened to one of my students. If that had happened to one of your guys, what would you have said? And I got different answers that were always strategic or tactical, like errors that were made. None of them said, well, we're teaching people wrong. I think that a lot of people see violence as consensual. And that's why I differentiate between a street fight and a violent encounter. A street fight is consensual. It's illegal. It's immoral. It's unethical. And I call it a douchebag fight, where, you don't need to do that. And people send me videos and links to this stuff all the time, and I don't post them. I just go, that's not real self-defense. There's one going around viral of two guys arguing, and then the guy gets stabbed in the stomach and bleeds out. And, the guy pulls out like a 10-inch carving knife and stabs him. And I go, they're like, what do you mean that's not self-defense? It's two douchebags fighting, and one guy's a knife and one guy doesn't. And neither one of them had to be there. And you could see that. That wasn't an abduction. It wasn't a robbery, gone bad. It wasn't a home invasion gone mad. That was just douchebag fight. So I always had this element of conscience, accountability, ethics, and morals in everything that I did. And that might be the reason I'm so polarizing, is because I would just tell people, like, I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think there's any evidence of that. And let's pressure test it. Let's do that. Let's try to make that move happen. And then, of course, I only developed high gear in 1993 after 5 years of prototyping and testing it. Before that, we were just like Frankenstein, like just putting on different pieces of equipment. But we would do 1-on-1s and 2-on-1s and 4-on-2s and 6-on-1s and videotape all sorts of shit. And you almost couldn't, like, if you replicated the real event, you almost couldn't make anything happen that you thought was going to happen. And we actually went through, and that was part of the crucible, man, is we would say to experienced people, you got 3 guys in front of you there, they want your wallet. What are some of the things you think you would pull off? Like, people write down on an index card, I'll do this, I'll headbutt the guy here, I'll hit this guy with an uppercut, I'll sweep the leg, whatever the hell. I'm making jokes now. And then when it happened, we go, well, what happened there? And it was like, fuck, man, that was so different. That was, and so these experiments became real truth filters. And, you asked me, you said I was one of the first guys to incorporate the behavioral and emotional. To be honest, and I'm biting my tongue here, what made me introduce it is because I couldn't find it anywhere.
Yeah, it's
there were people, right, and so there was something in my conscience and my intuition that was saying, how come nobody's talking about fear, and how come he's talking about, like, de-escalating here, and how come he's nobody trying to diffuse this, and why does everything start from the fight? There's one very famous martial artist who had a book out, and he's talking about scenario training in it, multiple assailant stuff, and he describes the drill, and everyone starts the drill. They've got boxing gloves on. There's a picture in this book that he had released. and he's got like, 3 guys surrounded one guy, and they're all in boxing stances at the same distance apart, all, orthodox or southpaw forward. Everyone's in a boxing stance, everyone has gloves on, and he's describing, we're doing scenario training, multiple assailant. And I would look at that and go, no, that's kickboxing against 3 people. I'm not saying that that's easy, but that's not scenario training, right? I would look at real altercations and incidents that I'd have. I remember before road rage, became a thing, accidentally cutting some guy off was in my blind spot. And I hear we pull up to the light. I've forgotten about it. I did that thing, when you cut somebody off and they give you the finger and honk. And I gestured with my hand like, oh shit, sorry, man, I didn't see you. But I keep going ahead. I've forgotten about it. About a quarter mile up the street, I hit a light. There's a car in front of me, and I hear brakes, and I hit, and I hear tires chirp, and I look up, and I see this guy jumping out of his car, and he's running like he's 3 cars behind me, and he's running and I just knew it was him. It was just like I couldn't see his car, but I heard it, and I knew, like, it was just that intuition. I saw the door open, and I see him running towards me. I'm like, fuck. And I'm trapped in the car. So I jump out. My window's down. It was summertime, and he's on a dead tear. And I jump out of the car, and we collide. And next thing we know, we're like in this freaking god awful clinch, rolling around on the, off the side and trunk of my car. And people jumped, and people tried to break up fights. They didn't film stuff. Of course, there were no cell phones.
People are much more used to it then.
And they're pulling us apart and everything. And I remember going fuck, no good wrestling, didn't get a punch off, no time to kick. Because as soon as I got out of the car, he was like on me, and I just ran right into him, so, but it was my heart was racing after, and I was like that tunnel vision. I was like, what the fuck was that? And how did I not pick up on any of that? And it was like, where was all my martial arts and all? It was like, it was crazy. And so those were the, in interviewing people and talking to them, I discovered this, and this has been consistent for decades now. You got people who tell you every detail in their real violent encounter, and I knew they were full of shit. Yeah, and then I saw this, and everything went into slow motion, and then I swept his leg here. When he went down, I grabbed this guy here, and then and I'm like, I don't remember the first several seconds of any fight I've ever been in, in terms of the clarity of movement. I might remember I was sitting here, and then all of a sudden I realized, fuck, but, and I would meet these people, and the more people that I interviewed, and remember, I interviewed hundreds and hundreds of people. What I was trying to do is, and I also understood this was weird too, is I remember in the 80s, somebody saying, hey, I know some pretty crazy rough bars that we could go into, and you guaranteed you can have a fight. You look at somebody the wrong way. And people looking at me with crazy eyes going, we should do that. And I'm like, no, we shouldn't do that. That's stupid. And they're like, well, why? How else are you going to test this stuff? And I knew right away, and I've said this many times over the year, that if you get into a fight on purpose, it's because part of you knows you can beat this guy. And therefore, that's not self-defense. And that makes it illegal, immoral, unethical, and bullshit in terms of your test. Because the real test is if you're scared and you can make stuff work. Not if you're lining somebody up to sucker punch them. And there's a lot of, and I want to go deep on this for a moment, because there's a lot of advertising coming out again. And there was the TRS ads back in the day where people would talk about, hey, learn from so-and-so. He's had 600 street fights. And people would ask me, what do you think of this guy? I go, look, I don't want to take a self-defense lesson from a guy who's had 600 street fights, because street fighting is not self-defense. They are psychologically, ethically, legally, completely different. There's something completely going on in your mind that's completely different than, you going out and looking for a fight. And so when you're looking for a fight, or if I say to you, Joe, to get to your next level in my street fighting art, you got to get into a fight Friday night and you got to have a witness. So get back to me on that. If you believe that bullshit, you would go to a bar and you would either consciously or unconsciously pick somebody that you thought you could beat. You would never consciously or unconsciously pick somebody who you thought might kill you or maim you or put you in a hospital.
Yeah,
That's just not the way the survival system works.
Yeah, you'll make sure you're not drinking, you're paying attention, you're situationally aware, and you'll look for the guy that you think is an easy one to rile up that you've got a chance of beating because there's an objective.
And listen, I tell this story of when I was down at Fort Bragg working with some military groups, and I got in a couple of days early. I don't remember if I told them the first one, but it connects to this. And one of the guys on Saturday says, "Hey, do you want to go jumping?" And I said, "Like up and down?" He goes, "Ha, no, skydiving." I said, "No, thanks, man. I'm good. I don't like jumping out of an airplane." And he goes, "Hey, I thought you're Mr. Fear Management." And I said, "I am. I'm managing my fear by not jumping out of the airplane." So him and his buddies laugh, and I go, "Hey, are you afraid of skydiving?" He says, "No, I do it every time I can. I got over 600 jumps." I said, "Well, there's guys on your unit that don't like skydiving, but they do it anyhow to stay qualified so they could deploy on your missions and train, correct?" He goes, "Yeah." I said, "So that's the difference. If you're not afraid of it, then you don't understand the fear management element of that." And I always tell people, you can't be brave if you're not afraid. You cannot be brave if you're not afraid. I said, I don't want to take a skydiving lesson from somebody who's an adrenaline junkie. I want to take a skydiving lesson from somebody who, like me, is afraid of skydiving, but recognizes I got to do it. And as a side note, I have jumped out of an airplane twice as a fear management experiment. But this connection, I was telling people, like, you got these guys now. Hey, so-and-so's a SWAT cop, and he's been in 12 MMA fights, and he's been in 90 street fights, and now he's got the latest, greatest self-defense program. He's not teaching you self-defense. He's teaching you street fighting, and there's nothing wrong with that if that's what you want to learn. But somebody who likes to fight probably can't teach you what you want to know about self-defense and avoiding violence, which is why I always tell people two things. One, I don't teach you how to fight. I teach you how to not fight. But I teach you when somebody crosses a line, how to protect yourself, how to be your own bodyguard. That, even though my language right now is so much more polished than it was in the 80s and 90s, that was always kind of like the mantra. And I remember in the 80s, late 80s and early 90s, talking to like a women's group saying, like, I remember early 80s saying, "How many of you have life insurance?" And they all put their hand up, all these moms. I said, "How many of you have life extension insurance?" And they're like, "What's that?" I go, "That's your ability to protect yourself. You need to learn, how to detect and avoid situations. And if push comes to shove, how to protect yourself." And when the whole be your own bodyguard thing. But I would always make this joke about life extension insurance because it was people go, "What is that?" And I'd say self-defense, So I always had that filter where I would look at that and go, and now I tell people, when I'm talking at tactical conferences and consulting for, whether it's a military or law enforcement program, and I go, "Listen, like, everything is fun to practice, but you've got limited training time, limited budgets, limited interest. Like, everyone who works at your police department or in your military group, they're not professional fighters in the mano a mano sense. So they're not going to train 2-3 times a day like somebody who's like a full-time MMA fighter." So, is this? I came up with this concept, wrote an article on it called "Probable versus Possible." That everything's possible, but not everything's probable. So what's probably going to happen, and let's work on that. So all the filters were always there. And you asked me, what spawned this whole behavioral, emotional, psychological thing. It was because it wasn't there. Everyone always started with the physical. And we even, like, a few years back, I Googled the definition for self-defense, and the worldwide dictionary, most of them describe it as the physical act of protecting your property or your life. So even the dictionary if you peel the onion and look at what it's implying, is the attack has already happened, and now you're fighting to protect your property or your life.
Yeah, yeah, it's
And
reactive.
yeah, there's no there like the world's definition of self-defense doesn't even include behavioral, emotional, situational awareness. And so in our stuff, like way back, and you could look at this 1986 when I came out with the Panther Productions videos. The first videotape was called Cerebral Self-Defense. And in 1986, when we recorded it, had detect, diffuse, defend, detect and avoid, defuse and de-escalate, and if push comes to shove, defend, be your own bodyguard. And we changed about 2 years ago. I said, I'm going to rewrite the definition in one day, hopefully in my lifetime, so I could see it. When people ask what's the definition of self-defense, they will say the decision to choose safety when danger is imminent. The decision to choose safety when danger is imminent. And that means what that does is if I get a bad feeling about a person, place, or thing, that I am going to choose safety. And that the safety moment there, that's going to be determined through our three eyes: instincts, intuition, and intelligence. And that is going to mean I'm going to absent myself, get the hell out of there, or barricade myself, or maybe I got to charge the threat. But it gives us, what it's doing is it's educating the neuroscience in your brain, the reticular activating system, and teaching the limbic system, the amygdala, the reptilian brain, and your executive function, cognitive brain, to work together. And that's what's really missing. And hopefully that made sense. Is so every person, trained or untrained, gets a bad feeling before shit's about to fucking go down. And everyone around the world confirms this. In different words, they'll say, yeah, I knew something was wrong. I had a bad feeling. I knew I was about to get attacked. You ask a cop, I knew he was going to fight. I knew he was going to resist. I knew he was going to run. And so people get this feeling, well, what is it? That is your reptilian brain. That's your intuition and instincts speaking to you. But because we don't build that into the whole training protocol, so that's the long and short of it. The behavioral, emotional, psychological was there. It was such an obvious void for me that I began that journey in the 80s trying to fill in the blanks.
Yeah, that's really interesting. As you said, we sometimes see these self-defense has been taught as this purely reactive thing where you're already in a really bad position. You've got to fight your way out of it when real self-defense is not being in that position in the first place. I remember teaching a seminar years ago, and at the end we had a bit of a Q&A, and someone asked me, what would you do if you got hit by a baseball bat? I said, I'd probably fucking bleed and die. I don't know, man. I've already been hit. Right. I'm not sure what's going to happen after that. Why was the guy that close to me with a bat? Like, how did I miss that?
A strange question.
I know, right? It's like sometimes you can tell a lot about where people's heads are at by what questions they ask. I see this, and this is probably a decent short topic, is common mistakes people make when trying to introduce scenario replication into their training or into their existing martial arts program. I've seen a few where you've got someone mounted on top of somebody with a knife, and the defender has to escape. It's like, what a shitty position to start in. I mean, all you're doing is programming failure at that point. There's no way that person's going to get out of there without being stabbed. So why program failed reps? You need to give them a chance. Like that, you have to program some positivity or some chance of success in the drill, I think. But for your observation, like, what are some of the common mistakes you see?
Yeah. So in fairness to the example you gave, if that's where it started and that was the scope of it, and I see that a lot, and it's not explained, so that might be it. And if that was, that's no different than starting in a headlock. And I always talk about that. Is like, if you had a choice to intercept the headlock and stop it there, or get out of the headlock and try to defend it there, which would you pick? Obviously intercepting it would be way safer, and it's more consistent with everything I just talked about in my last little rant. So there's a lot of people who start from the physical because that's where they're not malicious. That's just where that's where they've been taught. And now they're just trying to get creative. You look at most knife programs. If we're in a knife class, the drills start with, like the dynamic alive drills start with a knife in your hands, and now you may be like sparring with the knife, and you got like marking, you got chalk or ink, and you're seeing who gets cut, and you would turn them into these games. And individually, if they're part of a cumulative effect, they all have value. It's when you're leaving out other stuff, like you're leaving out elements of D1, D2, D3. That's why like the 3Ds is possibly the most important thing when you say like what is missing or common flaws is people start just the physical, and they start, they'll say things like, hey, head on a swivel, situational awareness. Okay, grab your knife. Guy's got a knife in your back. Here's what you should do. And you're like, okay, just skip D1, D2, and just went right to not even just to D3, but holy shit, D3. So you're right if that's where they're starting. And so you want to kind of have a checklist. Like if you're going to go camping, or you're going to go on a trip, or you're going to go, okay, do I have a map? Do I know where we're going? Do I have gas? Is the car loaded? Do I need a weapon here? Do I need a permit here? Do I need my passport here? Whatever it is, what's your checklist? So there should be a scenario checklist that you run through. And I'm not going to give people my checklist. Obviously, I want them to come to my seminar, but I will tell you this: use the 3Ds, detect, diffuse, defend. Like, are you talking about and building into your training elements that cover what if you're using our methodology, D1, situational awareness, detect and avoid? Are you also practicing avoiding? Like, do the students or does your class get reps in avoidance? So when I'm teaching somebody, well, the exciting part is, okay, I got high gear on and I headbutted the guy twice and then I got out of the room. Like, everyone wants to get to there, but I make people practice the avoidance part. So they actually get actual reps of D1, and then they get actual reps of D2. Some of these strategies in the science and psychology of de-escalation. So they're actually practicing that as well, right? And then they actually get reps of D3. And we will break that down, Joe, into preemptive, anticipatory moves, and we'll also have it be more reactive, primal to protective. So we practice both ways. So what's happening? So your brain is like a hard drive computer, and every rep you don't do is a void in your data bank, and every rep you do is something there. If you improve your perception speed, you decrease your reaction time. How do you improve perception speed? By having a recording of it, right? So if I say to you, hey man, I'm going to come over for a drink, do you have any whiskey, any Jack Daniels, any vodka? You may get up and go look at your home bar, or you see it in your brain. You look in your brain and you go, okay, what do I have? What do I have here? Do I need that? And you got to scan through. So your brain records all these things. Well, if you're doing, here's another 3-letter share for you guys: realistic, relevant, and rigorous. I call the 3 R's: realistic, relevant, and rigorous. So your scenarios should run through the formula of D1, D2, D3, and they should be realistic. What does that mean? That means they're not stylized. You could actually look at that and go, if we took the gear off and we put this between 2 cars, or in an elevator, in a stairwell, in a garage, would somebody call the cops? Right? Does it look realistic? Even if it's in slow motion, even if you have no equipment, is your movement realistic?
Yeah.
Is it relevant? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Relevant is the next one. And so, and realistic and relevant can be confused, but they're part of the same evolution. And then rigorous, ultimately, and if you don't have the right equipment, you can't do rigorous scenarios. You're going to get hurt. But you can still, mess around with it. The most important thing is improve perception speed, decrease reaction time. And you do that by replicating what you're going to do. This is a thing that messes people up, is the biggest mistake. Well, there's 3 big ones: ego. The 3 big ones are ego. That's where I see people get hurt. That's where I see people get pissed. That's why I see people lose focus and control. When we're role playing, I tell people, listen, there's a good guy and a bad guy if we're doing a two-person role play, two-person scenario. Both people are role players, because I'm going to say to the good guy, this is where you lose the fight. And he's like, well, but I didn't, I don't want to lose a fight. Yeah, but I'm going to have you lose this fight, because you're going to work from this deficit position, and you're going to understand what it's like to be scared and out of breath. And that's going to inspire you to respect D1 more. You tracking that, Joe? It's like, if we always, and a lot of people, they don't lose, they don't get that. And I go, listen, you're going to have to work from the worst case position. And then as we do iteration after iteration, you start to intercept it more and more. And so when we do a full-blown ballistic microfight high gear seminar, we'll actually use CCTV, violent encounters. Somewhere people lose their life in the violent encounter. We replicate that first over and over again until we can, as a group, collectively, intelligently, emotionally go, that's what that person was thinking and feeling there. So I might put you in gear, Joe, and go, this person just got grabbed, thrown to the ground, kicked in the head 8 times, and was robbed and ended up dying from the head injuries. And you're going to be that person for 2 or 4 or 6 or 8 or 10 reps. And then we're going to talk about that. And you're going to say things like, that was the scariest fucking shit after, because I know that person died because we saw the video. And then we look at people, we go, that's the penalty of inaction. Inaction spelled INACTION, not doing anything. Being on your phone at the wrong time, texting, headphones in at the wrong time, thinking you live in a bubble. But this can also happen, Joe, by starting all your scenarios at the wrong time. Tracking everybody? If all my scenarios start with me in a headlock or me being choked or me being tackled, what we've discovered through research over decades is that you lose the fight on the way to the fight. The boxer, the MMA guy, the point fighter. It's the walk there where you're in your head. And so that walk is short during sudden violence. I turn around from an ATM. I'm walking to my car. I open the door because I think it's somebody trick-or-treating, and all of a sudden I'm getting punched in the face. It's in that moment where I'm going, holy shit, and my reptilian brain, hijacks, again, executive function. Executive function, cognitive brain, was what I was telling myself I would do whenever I was going to be attacked. So the scenario training is really the missing component. And most people that I've seen, and they're not malicious, but what they've done is they put on some equipment and they've picked up where most of the regular, more choreographed self-defense ended, and now they're just putting on gear and starting there. And really, for the complete emotional, psychological experience, you want to have a story told. And so remember the 3 R's: realistic, relevant, and rigorous. And then the 3 D's. Is it going through detect, diffuse, defend? And so this cumulative process, we'll tie this back to neural pathways, is every time you do a rep, your brain records it. It's got a memory of it. And then the more reps you do, the better your anticipation gets for what's happening next, because it sees all these lines, and that improves your reaction time. And so when you're doing the scenarios, if I say to you, Joe, let yourself get attacked here. Okay, this time intercepted. Okay, at the first moment you pick up any danger in the role player here, I want you to intercept this time. This go right towards. And you're doing all these different reps. Your conscience and accountability is choosing what is optimal based on the scenario and the distance and the timing and so on and so forth. And we'll do things where, imagine this, I have you do like 20, 30 reps, and you're in gear and you're doing in the middle of the room. And then I move you closer to a doorway, Joe. And I go, Joe, look where you are. You're standing right by the doorway, this 1 foot this way, and you're out in the hallway and you're out here. But 4 feet in there is where the bad guy is. And now the confrontation starts. What do you do? Well, from doing, like, think of Pavlov's dog, right? That bell just rang. You want to go fight because you're in gear and you signed up for a scenario course. But what should you fucking do as a good Samaritan?
Yeah, exactly.
Out the door.
At those layers, yeah.
Right. And so what's interesting, if you're really visualizing this, is we're teaching people to have conscience and accountability. We're teaching them to behave like good humans and make the decision based on the scenario. So I go, Joe, you're right by the door here, and there's a guy 10 feet away from you calling you out. Just leave. Now I go, Joe, same scenario again, and he's threatening you, but this time your wife and your kid are behind him, and he's not letting them leave this room. Now what do you do? Right? So you can change, you can do all your physical training you want, and then you change the emotional and psychological values, and everything changes. It's a fascinating experience.
Absolutely. Look, I know we're running short on time because it's your wife's birthday where you are. It's Christmas Eve where I am. So one thing I just wanted to touch on before we finish, your high gear was really, it was an evolution in the field. Prior to that, as you said, we're all using Frankenstein suits, or we're using combination of a baseball chest plate with a ice hockey helmet and some cricket gloves or whatever, and then there was the red man suit, which was very bulky and restrictive in movement, whereas high gear was really the first custom built suit that allowed full movement and proper scenario replication. So that's probably one of the biggest challenges when organizations, especially we're talking about organizations that are putting staff through this sort of training, is protecting against injury and making sure that everyone's fit to go to work the next morning. So do you just want to speak a little bit about the development of high gear, and I'll let you give a bit of a plug about where people can get it and the benefits of it as we're wrapping up.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, man. So high gear was a labor of love. It took me 5 years to put together. I remember I was teaching a seminar in Nashville in 1988, and I drew a picture of it on a napkin. Talking to my buddy, I said, one day I'm going to build a suit looks like this, and I'm going to make it like it's going to be counterintuitive. I'm going to make it as streamlined as possible so the role players can move real speed, real dynamically. And before that, there was only Fist and Red Man. And I said, as good as those suits are, they're too bulky because the role player can't move like a real bad guy. So the target you're going to hit isn't going to be there in a real fight. The arm you want to grab is going to feel like that. Your proximity sense is distorted. The role player is going to move slower, and I need something that's just like really ergonomic and allow people to move real time, real speed. Took us 5 years. We finally put it out there. My first client was Naval Special Warfare. And we've got some units and agencies that have like 100 suits, more suits. U.S. Army bought 7,800 to support their combatives program in 2009. And so everyone, like if you're really into self-defense, you should be using the high gear suit. There are some copies out there. There was actually a company in Australia that was so cool. And I forget who it was right now, but it was back almost 15 years ago. He calls me up. He says, hey man, I just got to order the gear from you. I was going to try and reverse engineer it, but I bought a suit. We cut it open. And he said, there's like over 500 parts inside of it. And I was like, this is bullshit. I'm not going to try and figure out how to do this. And it was like really funny. I laughed. I was like, wow. He said, good job building that, man. And that was the 5 years, different types of impact reduction foam, and so on and so forth. And there's of course, there's a copy came out of Germany. And then, and of course, everyone knows the famous copy out of Canada. But the thing about it is this: if you are doing any type of scenario training, the ability to actually headbutt your partner multiple times while you finesse the angle, the timing of that, or to throw an elbow, or to fall on the ground or bump into something and know the gear is going to take it. It's indispensable. It's like Bruce Lee said, you can't learn to swim standing on a beach. And so this is like the high gear is adding the water to your swimming. It allows you to, like, get in there and dive in. If we stay with the water pun for a moment, there's I'll send you a really good link that's got a lot of our videos on there, and show you that, the how to. But it's really changed the game for, we've got some of the world's top MMA guys have used it, from Frank Mir to Uriah Faber to BJ Penn. In fact, Randy Couture brought it on the first Ultimate Fighter. U.S. Army using it, hundreds and hundreds of agencies around, the world. And a lot of times, you asked about keeping people safe. A lot of times they'll just get, 2, 4, 6, 8 suits, and it's the instructors that are using them and the students that are defending, but the instructors have them on. So it depends on how you design your scenario training and build it from there. It's also for those of you that are like small school, or you're just training in your garage, you can also buy the gear modularly. Like, you can just buy a couple of helmets, or chest guard and helmet, or, part of a suit. Ultimately, just, eventually get a full suit if you're doing full on scenarios. So it depends what you want to use it for. But we've got a really good page on my website. If you just go to Blauer Spear, Blauer Spear, and you just look at the navigation, there's a couple of pages that have all the info you want. And yeah, I appreciate the shout out, man.
No worries at all, man. I'll let you get back to your wife's very special day, and I'll go thank my kids for being quiet in the background for an hour.
They were great, and all my kids were great too, in the background, and my wife. Yeah, I gotta go attend to her. No, this was great, man, and I hope we covered what you want to cover. The big thing is, listen, if anybody out there is teaching self-defense, if anyone out there is advertising, hey, we teach self-defense, the magic about what I shared with you, and listen, you could not like me, you could not like Spear, but high gear cuts through all the politics and all of the bullshit. You can pressure test, you can be doing wushu, tai chi, jiu-jitsu, aikido, whatever you want. Get a couple of suits and set up a scenario based on D1, D2, D3, RRR, realistic, relevant, rigorous, and just say, okay, you're standing at the bar here, you're doing this. There's more to it than that, but what you find out in the pseudo safety of your dojo, or your garage, or your basement, is like those 19 moves that you thought you were going to pull off, that didn't happen. And you may find that you're like Bruce Lee discovered, holy shit, my aerobic capacity sucks. And I wasn't breathing for like a minute and a half until I got to, like a good position where I could make the guy tap, or, simulate knocking him out, grounding and pounding him, or whatever it was. But it's a game changer. And I truly encourage you to look into it and research it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time again, Tony. Really appreciate it. I look forward to doing it again in the future.
Yeah, let's do another one. Appreciate it, Joe. Have a great one.
All right. Thanks, Tony.
Are you a fan of the show and would like it to keep going? Head on over to www.patreon.com/managingviolence and become a contributor. All money raised on Patreon goes directly into improving the quality of the show. Are you interested in booking Joe to speak at your club, school, company, or event? Joe is an experienced keynote speaker and trainer, and available for bookings at all relevant events.
Thank you once again to Tony Blauer for a fascinating conversation. And as a heads up, this was the last episode that was recorded on my old recording gear. So we've received a very generous sponsorship from Risk to Solution. And with that sponsorship, we now have some new tech. So I'm pretty excited. You'll probably notice that the intro and the outro have been recorded a little bit more smoothly with a little bit better quality sound, and that's because it's been recorded on the new gear. So next week we have a new sponsor and also new sound. So please sign in. Please tune in, rather. Please tune in for the next episode when that drops. Now, if you have missed the announcements this week on our social media, then what are you doing? Why are you not following us on social media? Why haven't you hit subscribe? Why haven't you got notifications every time that we post something? Because you are missing out, my friend. But if you have missed out, let's assume that you've done a tech detox over the Christmas New Year period and you haven't seen the notifications. I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. We have 2 new podcasts starting in 2020. The first one is the Presilience podcast. The Presilience podcast is a corporate initiative from my employers at Risk2 Solution. And we are going to be tackling all manner of corporate risk management, enterprise risk management concerns. There will be some overlap with the Managing Violence podcast because one of the things that I do focus on is occupational violence and aggression, workplace violence. We'll be talking a little bit about occupational health and safety, security, fire safety, risk culture, all sorts of different topics relating to the corporate end of risk management. So if you're interested in that side, please head over to the Presilience podcast and hit subscribe on that one. Secondly, coming up in late January, I'll be launching my personal second podcast, which is Primed by Joe Saunders. Primed by Joe Saunders. And that allows me to interview a whole bunch of really interesting people that help you improve your capacity to deal with anything life may throw at you, even if it isn't related to violence. So one of my passions is making ordinary people extraordinary. And we'll be talking about all sorts of topics like improving your memory, surviving a terrorist attack, what to do in a natural disaster, maybe how to improve your public speaking skills, how to be more alert and aware with cybersecurity. There's a whole bunch of different topics. If you've ever been interested in improving your physical, personal, emotional, mental capacity, there will be a show for you on Primed by Joe Saunders. Now, that doesn't mean the Managing Violence podcast is going anywhere. We are sticking around. The formatting of the show may change. I don't ever want to get to a point where I am releasing a boring show just because I'm trying to hit a deadline. So it's possible that the show will be a little bit more sporadic, but as I record interviews with guests, they will be uploaded. I still have a stack of guests that I have arranged interviews with or that have agreed to be interviewed that we just haven't managed to nail down time for yet. So as those are recorded, they will be released. I'm not going to commit to a release schedule at this point, just because, as I said, I don't want to ever be scrambling to hit a deadline and give you a subpar show. I'd rather have the best experts with the best stories and the best quality show we possibly can. So every time you hit download, you know what you're getting. All right, that's it for today. Welcome to 2020. Hope you've had a wonderful, relaxing break and you are ready to get after it in the new decade. I'll be back very soon with another episode of the Managing Violence podcast. Alternatively, I will catch you on the Presilience podcast and Primed by Joe Saunders. I will talk to you next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Managing Violence podcast. For more information or to listen to previous episodes, please check out www.joesaunders.com.au or visit us on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. Don't forget to rate and subscribe so you never miss a show.